And today's broadcast is brought to you by Eclectic Horseman Magazine. Stay tuned for Eclectic Conversations, hosted by Emily Gitchy.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm here with Smoke Elzer and Eva to visit about Hush of the Land, a lifetime in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to visit with you about this book.
Thank you for talking to us about it.
Yeah,
Excited.
you bet. We're excited about it.
Wonderful. Well, I feel like I want to just start by saying I feel like this book should come with like a warning label, because after reading it, I'm like, sign me up. I want to go. So I'm like, oh man, I just can't believe what a great job. The writing is so beautiful, and I just feel like I'm there, and I want to go have these experiences. So tell us a little bit about the origin of putting this book together.
Yeah, so I took Smoke's packing class. I think that's now almost 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And I basically just wanted to learn how to pack mules from Smoke. I just moved to town. I just started working at the University of Montana, and he was the first class I signed up for. And then I started listening to his stories. So the way he teaches is he shows you how to pack a mule, but he also tells you about how his life was with mules and his adventures in the Bob Marshall. And I just had this strong feeling that I really wanted to preserve these stories. And for whatever reason, he agreed for me to do that, which is really, he had no idea who I was, really, this random person from Germany coming in. But I think we just struck a friendship and a connection with each other. And now 9 years later, we had over 800 hours of recordings. We spent a lot of times right here where we're sitting right here now.
Right here.
And he was just telling me any story he wanted to. I had no real no real guideline. I was just telling like any story you want. And so and then it was then to me to put that later in a book. That was not the idea at the beginning. That really came later. But we're definitely glad for what it is today.
Yeah, sure are. She did a great job.
Yeah. Well, I love how the book, like how it starts at the beginning with your, and so like you just feel like you're pulled along on the journey with you and all of your experiences. And after, thinking about all of those hours of tape, boy, how did you decide what to keep and what not to keep?
The hardest thing, I always say we could probably do another one easy. Yeah, it was difficult. I think it was also just exactly how you said. So my goal was that I could let readers experience the same that I experienced sitting here in this barn, listening to the stories, and also kind of drawing from my own experience being on trips and being out in the backcountry on horses. I think that helped a lot. I'm a very immersive writer, so it helps me to be in that environment in order to write. And I'm so glad it worked out. It's great.
Yeah. Well, and I loved, I feel like I also had this like history lesson as I'm reading through, and all these things I'd, never even knew about, like the Montana Centennial Train and the horse program at Montana State University way back then. And I mean, just all these really cool facts. Like I just can't imagine, your brain must be so full of all of these details.
Yeah, it was so, but that's a wonderful life lived, right? So every time he was telling me about these things, I was like, oh, that's super interesting. And so my academic brain turned on, and I went into the archives, and I just like went through and spent hours. I love archives. So I just had a great time looking all of these things up. So anybody could understand it the same way I had to learn all these things. Like I didn't know what a Centennial Train was. Smoke explained it to me, but the whole thing around it, the way his life is just incredible. Like all these different places he has been and experienced and lived through is pretty amazing. They're all pretty amazing.
Yeah, I tell a new story every time we do a book signing.
Yeah.
Something that's not in the book.
Yeah.
There's so many more.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about that. I know that one of our subscribers went to one of your book readings and signings, and just had a wonderful time. How has that been, taking the book out into the world?
It's been really great. You know, we've had a lot of support and a lot of people ask me a lot of questions, which fortunately I've had the experience to answer them and to answer them real well. So I think that's the thing. Yeah, we've had lots of people at our book signings, and we've got a couple more yet to go.
Wonderful. Well, what's been the most surprising response to the book when you've been out talking to folks?
And the most surprising thing is that when we go to small communities, I mean, we're talking about 500, maybe 2,000 people, less than 2,000 people, and we get 40 to 60, maybe 80 people show up at those kind of readings. That's just amazing to me. And it was right in all the old towns that I used to be in. So it worked out real well. And I was really surprised at that. And then the university really came through too and really supported a lot.
That's wonderful. I'm not quite sure how to ask this question. Maybe for folks who haven't read the book yet, maybe could you just give them a little bit of an overview of like a little taste of the process that the adding, like I didn't understand that the Bob Marshall Wilderness was comprised of several different areas, and so like I learned a lot about your guys' advocacy for adding to that. Can you just maybe give folks who've never heard about it a little bit of a taste about that?
Yeah, the Bob Marshall started out at about 900,000 acres, and it was dedicated in 1948. And Bob Marshall was one of the founders, but he was dead at that time. That's what they named it after him. He was a staunch conservationist, started the Wilderness Society, and did a lot of things like that. And then as time went on, we found out that people really wanted to be in the wilderness. They wanted to be on their own. They wanted to go out and see some of this. So as that happened, then we kept adding the Great Bear and the Lincoln Scapegoat. And now we have a wilderness area that's about 150,000 acres. And and we're hoping to add a little bit more to it. We're still working on adding things to it. In fact, it is 3 years ago, I think it was, we added the East Front, and they added a little wilderness over on that side. And now we're thinking about adding some more wilderness to the southern end of the Bob Marshall. So, but people really wanted to get out, and they wanted to have the wilderness interpreted to them. And that's what I try to do.
Well, and I love that in the book when you talk about, giving people experiences, and you're telling about the folks from the city who have not seen the stars and who weren't comfortable outdoors. And I just I could really feel what that must have felt like, and just what a powerful role that is to show that to people.
Yeah, that worked out real well. I always took my guests the first 2 or 3 days. You can hardly talk to any of the guests, mainly because they're so excited, and they're wound up like a clock, real tight. And it takes them about 3 or 4 days to settle down, realize that we're traveling at 3 miles an hour, and that we're looking at wilderness, and we can ride in here for almost 10 days without seeing another road or house or anything. And when you do that, then I take my guests out and set them by a tree or by a big rock or by the river or somewhere by themselves, and let them just sit and think about what their life is like right now. And they had nobody to talk to. They couldn't talk to their wife or couldn't talk to anybody because there was nobody there. And they heard things, they heard the squirrels and they heard animals moving around them, and they smelled the trees, which the ponderosa pine, smells like vanilla. And I had an executive, pretty big executive, that he would run over every time after the first trip. As soon as I'd go in the hills, if he'd come to a big ponderosa pine, he'd jump off. Wait a minute, smoke! He'd run over and smell that tree. And here's a guy that handled thousands of people in his business. But that's what I like to do, and I enjoyed it just as much as they did. I was a guest just like they were, because they were people that hadn't seen that kind of thing, and so I was a guest also on almost all of my trips, because I learned a whole lot of things from them that I would have never known.
Yeah. That's interesting to think about. It's a little like getting to be a kid again when you are raising your kids, seeing it through their eyes for the first time.
Yes. Yes.
That's so cool. And for people who haven't experienced being out in the wilderness like that, like how would you communicate to them its importance?
The way I can interpret it as for their importance is the fact that they spent their money to come and see it. And once they've seen it, then they realize that was a good investment. So that's the only way I could explain it, really. Yeah, because my guests just fell in love with it all the time. Every trip. I don't think I had a bad summer trip at all. Maybe one or two hunting trips where they didn't get an elk, but that's the way it is. I had one hunting trip that they had a great time and didn't shoot a thing, didn't fire their guns at all. They just had a good time.
Yeah.
Rode around and looked at the tracks and followed elk and tracked them and hid from them and all that stuff. That's part of the thing. And I think people, I enjoyed the people as much as they enjoyed having me take them.
Well, and you mentioned that some folks would come back multiple times, and so having those relationships over the years must have been special. Yeah,
real special. Some of them even come back for over 12 years in a row, and then finally bought land out here and built a house. They live here.
Yeah.
I see them every 2 or 3 weeks now. We have dinner together a lot, and we just visit a lot. So, and they love Montana.
So because of a lot of my viewers they're horse people, and so they're super interested in the horsemanship side of things.
Yes.
Like, tell us a little bit about what it's like to prepare the horses and the mules for an experience like this. Like, how do you find them? How do you prepare them? Do they like their jobs? Talk a little bit about that.
The horses and mules really do like their job, because it's although it's hard work. I mean, in the summer we're going probably 70 to 80 days in a row, day after day. But the horses and the mules really kind of enjoy it, because the guests, first of all, the guests experience the back of a horse, and they share their experience with that horse. As a matter of fact, at Christmas time, I still get Christmas cards naming Lupin, or naming Jem, or naming Arapaho, their horse that they rode. And I have people that send apples, those little packaged apples that you can send, and pears and all that fruit that you can send. In matter of fact, one guest sent me grapefruit. And I had to write her back, and I said, horses don't eat grapefruit, but I sure enjoy it. But the horses learn, and we ride all our horses well, before we let any guest on them. And they learn really right away that the person sitting on their back is trying to share an experience with the animal. And I think that's a real important thing, because the guests they just fall in love with their horse. I've had them go up, they kiss them on the nose before they leave, and had them with tears coming down, and saying goodbye to Lupin or one of the animals. And matter of fact, I have a lot of trouble. I run kind of an old home for horses and mules. I have horses and mules out here right now, that are in their 30s. And I can't put them down. I'm not going to go out and shoot them or poison them. What I'm going to do is keep them as long as they can get up and stay healthy. And I can call a vet, have them checked all the time, so that I know they're in good shape. That's how I do it. But every once in a while, one of them can't do it, and they die. And I just buried one here about 3-4 weeks ago. And I bought a backhoe just for that purpose.
Oh,
On my property here now, I've got about 36 animals buried on about 10 acres right here in the backyard. And I'm starting to
wow.
find it hard to find a place. But I would rather do that because I share the same experience these horses and mules do. When they come up and get a pellet from me, they're telling me, hey, when can we go to the back end of the bob? When can we go up this trail? Or when can we go over the pass and drop into the Danaher? You know, when can we do that? And they kind of nudge me all the time to do that. And they know they can't do it, and I know I can't do it, but that's part of their life.
Yeah.
I think, I've saved a lot of horses from being beat to death to do certain elements of training, such as learning how to cutting horses and learning how to dressage and how to jump and all those kind of things. Those horses quite often suffered a good bit. Matter of fact, I had a trainer in the Bitterroot called me up and he said, I've got a horse that you should have. And I said, well, what kind of horse is he? Well, he's gaited. He's really a good horse. He's about 10 years old. The only problem is when he goes into the arena and we have him do all the things that we want him to do in the arena, and he goes around and around and around, and then he goes the other way around and around and around and jumps this and jumps that and steps over this, and he just getting tired of it. He says, now I put a young person on him, and he'll go maybe 1 or 2 rounds, and he just lowers his head way down, and the person falls off. So he said, I can't use him anymore. He said, this horse is probably worth $15,000 or $20,000. Prince was his name, and a good horse. So can I sell him to you? And I said, sure, I'll buy him. So I paid nothing for him virtually. I think it was $500, and the horse was worth a lot more. Brought him up here, put him guests on him. He loved it. You could just see him go down the trail, and he was looking at the mountains and looking at the flowers and smelling the different grasses that he could eat. He just loved it. He never bucked anybody off, ever, with me, ever. And I had him right up until he died. And he was just a great horse. And a lot of the horses are that way. They get tired of doing just one thing at a time. My horses hardly ever saw the same trail twice in the summer. They saw new trails and new experiences and new guests to ride them, new people.
Yeah.
So that's what.
Yeah, you have to think that just must be like the best job to have for them. And I love the part in the book about the Dodge City, the sightseeing
Dodge
mule.
City, yeah.
I can just see that.
I would hate to have visited him about 2 or 3 years later, being now in a city where he couldn't look out over the landscape and being a little, probably a small pasture, lots of food, and everything else. He was well taken care of, but he didn't have the experiences that he had when he was working for us and going down the trail.
Yeah. Well, and tell me a little bit about when you're telling the stories about sleeping out at night and the horses leaving. Like I was just like, oh my gosh! So the horses were just loose, and then you'd have to wrangle them back in every morning.
Yeah, what we did is I tried to find a couple of horses, or we had 4 that were really good, Curly and Lupin, that were really good at picketing. So what we do is I'd put all the horses together and pick out the horses that I think I could picket real well, train them to picket. That is, they're tied with one foot to a peg and on a long rope. The rope is 30 feet long. And then they learn to work in that area to graze. And the other horses learn to stick right with those guys because they don't know the country, and that's the way it was. And we turned our horses loose all the time. I'd turn out 25, 30. The one time we had problems was when a lot of other people brought their own horses. Oh. Then those horses didn't get along with our horses, so they just scattered out all over the country. And we had a heck of a time rounding them all up. Took us about 3 days, as a matter of fact, with good wranglers.
Yeah.
knew what the track looked like. And we found them at the end of their tracks.
Yeah, that sounds like quite an adventure.
Yep. See, the last track, that's where they're standing.
Yeah. Oh. How do you feel like after all of this time and all of this energy of going into preserving this wild place, how do you feel about the future of it? Do you feel like the will is still strong for people to fight to keep it pristine?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I feel that people still want this kind of thing. See, in my business, I never advertised.
Yeah.
I printed one brochure, 2,000 of them, and I still got about 500 or 800 sitting in the house. And Eva could probably answer that too. What do you think? Do you think people still want to go? And she's one of them.
Yeah.
Here's a lady from Germany that, she rode trails in Germany. I'm sure she rode in forests and everything else, but never in this kind of experience.
Yeah, it's true. I don't know. It's a good question. I think there are definitely a lot of young people that are interested in it, and I think they would love to do it. And we work with them all the time. I mean, that's one of Smoke's biggest work, I think, right now, to just connect to young people and meet with them, and they're here in the barn all the time. I just think it's often difficult, especially when you have to afford a horse and make sure you can actually feed it and keep it. And I think that's with all the raising prices about like here in Missoula, but everywhere, it's just really hard to be able to keep a horse and have that experience. That said, though, there are ways of doing it without, and I never had a lot of money. I never had my own horse for years. You can always find opportunities, and I think that's kind of what it's important, to motivate them and to say you can still do it. You can do it. You can go out, you can clear a trail, you can hike, or you can have a horse from somebody else. You can, you can do it. It's just, I think often it's harder. It's maybe a little harder than it used to be for sure here, right? I mean, from what I learned from you too. And I think, but there are also a ton of challenges. I think really a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to protecting those places that has not been protected yet. So I think we're pretty safe when it comes to the Bob Marshall. We think, but it's really darn hard to get any of the remaining wild places that we still have actually under the protection, that are not going to be mined or sold off to private and to be private land, or have roads built through them, or being logged. All of that is hard. It's hard work. I think we write in the book too, it doesn't take one man, right? It's the choir that makes all the difference. And it's the same thing that it was in Smoke's early days that it is today. I think that's maybe a good or a bad thing. I don't know, but it is what it is.
Yeah. And is there still like a community of outfitters? Like, is this something that a lot of people are doing?
Yeah, although the number of outfitters have decreased to beat heck, mainly because of the price of horses. When we first, a lot of us outfitters, the outfitters that I know, that I'm retired, but I still go to all the meetings, and we were buying horses for $100, $150, $200, and buying horses that I kept all their lives because they were so good. Just like Prince was a good one. And besides that, I was hauling them in a 1950 truck. I didn't have a brand new diesel, whatever. And, we've lost about 4 or 5 years due to COVID, where kids were stuck with a computer and they learned there. They didn't even go to school. They didn't go out and brush their horses or have a horse that they could brush. And that's what I'm trying to fill in now. We're trying to catch those students that are seniors in high school and juniors and sophomores in college. We're trying to catch those kids and teach them what it's all about. Fact is, I've got a mule out here right now. I'll bring her in here Saturday, and I'll just let her wander around the rooms in the barn here. That's where we're at. And she'll walk up to several of them, and they'll pet her, and then she'll walk over to another one. And that's that. We're trying to train them. We're trying to teach our young people that horses are important,
Mhm.
and they can be an important part of their life if they want it to be.
Mhm.
But they have to want it. And the only way I know they can want it is to teach them something about it, something they can do. And that's why I teach a lot of knots and that kind of thing. And I think I got probably 30 brushes out here. So I've seen them brushing 6 people brushing one horse. Everywhere. They're brushing
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. But it's amazing, isn't it? Like you see that sparkle, like when somebody gets around a horse or a mule and it wasn't there before, but then that
Yep.
light, and they're like, yes, we got one. So,
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And that's why I kind of like these old retired horses,
yeah.
because all of a sudden the owner has just put them in the back pasture and forgot about them. So they haven't had anybody talk to them for maybe 5, 10 years. And all of a sudden they end up here, and I have these kids coming around and petting them and brushing them up and doing all those kind of things. And all of a sudden the light comes on in those kids' eyes. I can see it. Yeah.
And it can even happen if they're a little older. Like I'm
Yeah.
teaching this class at the University of
Yes.
Montana where I
Yes.
bring students into
Yeah.
the Bob Marshall on horseback for 5 days. And we're here in the barn usually 2 or 3 weeks before. And some of them have never been on a horse. Actually, they sometimes are not even aware that this is actually what we're going to do. To go on. Because, I don't know, maybe they didn't read the description of the class. But they're like all of them. I didn't have a single person, even the person who was hurting badly after riding in for 21 miles, never having been on a horse. I thought he would never even speak to us again. And like 2 years later, we meet him on campus and he's like, oh my God, this was the best experience of my life. And I don't know if because it's a, kind of that type of experience that afterwards you feel like it was really important, and he did enjoy it, but it takes a while. And I think this combination between having the horse in a wild place, maybe you have never spent a night in a tent, and combining those two things is definitely an overload sometimes for people. But I think it also gets them out and connects them back to the land, what Smoke was talking about. That is really, really important. And I think today, more than ever, the connection away from the digital world and all the central overload that we have all day, to really just sit there by the tree. I do it with my kids all the time, but also with my class. And it's amazing what happens. Some take naps, that's fine. But it's a really true connection to the land that I think we all need. Like it's like gets your nervous system just to the right level. I really do.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about some of because that's something that is of great interest to me too, because I have anxiety about not enough young people getting involved with horses, and so many of our mentors are passing away, and we're losing all that information. And so you're working with young people. Are you hopeful for the future of the horse world?
Yeah, I think I am.
Yeah,
I mean,
I am
I'm
too.
also chronically optimistic, but I really do. And I think actually Smoke taught me probably more about teaching and engaging with young people than probably anybody. I mean, I'm a mother. I understand, part of that and exposing people to it. But I think it really is important to have to connect these young people even with stories. I really do. I think the oral story or even the book, we had so many young people at our readings. You would think, oh, these are all young older people that work with Smoke. Like, no, we had tons of families and tons of young people. And I think like stories really work, and they work in our human history. They always work. And I do think that that connects them to the horse and to wild places. But I think nothing connects better to horses than actually being with them. And I think to catch them early is a challenge, but we get people from schools, like teachers from schools coming and visit, and different classes. And I think it's also our job to kind of reach out and be approachable for them too, to offer that as an opportunity, but also be aware and realistic that it can be an expensive hobby that you have to commit to, it's a commitment. But as Smoke was saying, it doesn't always have to be with that new truck and that brand new trailer, right? It can also just be with whatever works. So I think so I share your kind of worry, and I think we both are, and I think we're definitely concerned. But we also see a lot of people really kind of stepping up and being engaged. So we're hopeful.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. A young lady I teach them how to tie up a horse. One of the things that most people don't know how. Have you ever watched the Westerners? They just come in and throw the reins over a rail. They never tie up. That doesn't happen normally. But you have to
try, but
you have to learn how to tie it. Well, a young lady, I taught her how to tie the knot. Now she helps me teach her. And it's her daughter. Etta. Etta comes in. She's how old?
11.
11 years old, and she's teaching 45-year-old guys how to go over this and under this, and then pull it tight, and you get it right.
Yeah.
See, and so she's part of my class.
That's fantastic. I love that.
And I think that's important because I think it's important to let them do it and let them make mistakes. I think Smoke is so good at that because obviously he is the boss, right? He knows what's going on, but he's so good at let people make mistakes. At least here, I'm sure when he was out in the woods with your crew, I think that those mistakes didn't go so well. But I really do think that there's something that he does that empowers young people to do that. My daughter feels. I mean, she also halfway grows up here, but I think. She does feel comfortable enough to do that. And I've seen that with other young people too. And I think that's something we need to be aware of. It's not about teaching them the right way. It's about getting that curiosity going and whatever that takes. And that can take mistakes. It can take a horse running off or I don't know, but that curiosity, and it's
the important part.
That's the most important part. I really do.
Even about a horse is curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think that's real important. Yeah, and all of my wranglers, most of them were college graduates, and they still hang around. Robin was just here about 2 weeks ago, and he was one of my first wranglers. And Jeff Miller, he was my very first wrangler. I couldn't even afford to pay him, but he said, "I'll volunteer for a year or so," and he helped me out. And he still helps me a good bit. Yeah. So. I keep in touch with all my wranglers. They call all the time. I got one that now he learned how to fly airplanes, and he learned how to use a glider, and then he learned how to be a commercial pilot, and he flew people to Vietnam and never shut the engines off on a DC-10 airplane hauling military people in, and went into Kabul and those places where he couldn't shut the airplane off, and now he flies helicopters for a hospital. He's a hospital helicopter pilot. And he called me up about, I saw him about 4 weeks ago. He just bought a plane, a good one, a good airplane. And he said, this spring, get ready. We're going to fly over the Bob Marshall. I want to take you right back over the Bob Marshall. Yeah. And I can hardly wait.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Steve is a good guy, and he learned how to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to add something for young people before I forget that. I think it's super important that, I don't know how many young people you have listening to this, but that they stay courageous, and that they really feel like they can ask questions and think they can jump in, apply it later when you apply for that job at that food range or that outfitter if you want to do it, go and talk to that, go talk, and, if you have an idea about writing a book or recording a story, just do it. I feel like be courageous, make mistakes. And I tell my students all the time, it's a great time to make mistakes when you're young. So even if you say no, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, one of her students got a job at a dude ranch right off at Spotted Bear.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. None of my students did more or less something in the woods.
In the woods, that's right, in the backcountry.
Or work for an outfitter or something.
For an outfitter.
Or not. They also worked for a senator. That's great too.
Yeah. Different kind of woods. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't know if would you have any interest in reading a section from the book while we're here?
Sure.
Yeah. We can do that.
Well, I usually include that in my email, and it's been so long that I wasn't sure if I asked if we could do that.
That's no problem. Which part? I can do the.
Why don't you read one and then I'll tell a story, a short story.
Okay. Yeah, okay. That's usually how we do it for the readings. I read a little and then he tells the story. Okay, so I think I'm just gonna read the prologue because it's kind of short and nice, and it kind of introduces all the people that are readings that usually don't I mean, your audience is a little different because you have horses. They all have horses, but that might be interesting to them too. The next turn in the trail is the door into a different world. The sky is bigger and bluer, the rocks stark and steep. The river roars with white foam. I'm riding above the North Fork of the Blackfoot River at 3 miles an hour. It is a clear summer day in our first stretch of an 8-day trip through the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana. 1.5 million acres of roadless land, home to elk, moose, lynx, wolves, and the grizzly bear, and the third largest wilderness area in the country. A family from the city rides behind me. My crew, with the pack mules carrying our food and gear, follow closely behind on the narrow trail above the water. After this turn, the canyon opens up. The green is fresh with a few mature trees, but most were burned by wildfire years ago. Though it's seemingly wild, many people have traveled this trail before us. Gold miners to find their luck, trappers to find the beaver, homesteaders to build a town, and before all of them, the Salish and Blackfeet people to reach their ancestral fishing and hunting grounds. Soon we will cross Smoke's Bridge and stop for lunch by the foundation of the old cabin right by the river, and it will tell the story of the man who once lived here, hiding from the U.S. Marshal. The guests won't ask many questions or call their horses lovingly by their names. Not yet, but tomorrow they will. And once their awe turns into love for the land, they will thank their horses each Christmas with a card and a box of carrots for bringing them here. My name is Smoke Elzer, and I spent 57 years working as an outfitter and guide, bringing thousands of people deep into the wilderness of Montana on horses and mules. This wilderness is true wild country. Cars can't travel through because there are no roads. People can't stay in a hotel because there are no permanent structures. Since the Wilderness Act of 1964, 100 million acres have been set aside in the United States to be left untrammeled by humans, a place for animals to live, rivers to flow free, and mountains to be kept intact from drilling and mining. Keeping this land wild was a big challenge back then, as it is today. I know it because I was there when the first wilderness areas were set aside, and I have stood up to keep it that way every day since. The Bob Marshall Wilderness has a special place in my heart. It is my spiritual home, my cathedral, and my favorite way to travel it is on a horse and with a mule. Because they carry our food and gear, we can stay longer, travel further, and connect deeper to the land around us. At 3 miles an hour and 5 feet off the ground, everybody can truly experience wilderness. The busy city people, the old and the young, even those who can't walk. Sitting on a horse, my guests have time to look around and can wonder about the 1,000-foot-high limestone cliff, the white cone-shaped flowers sprouting from the forest floor, and the strangely familiar animals that they might spot on a meadow just across the river, but only know from pictures. Then I tell them about the sedimentary rock that lifted up thousands of years ago along the Continental Divide, the bear grass that blooms only every 7 years, and the moose that likes to feed in the marshy wetland, and they see the land around them with different eyes. My guests always ask about grizzly bears, and I tell them the story of when I got treated by one with a collar, or when my horse chased another off during the night. The Bob Marshall is perfect for horse travel. Its many valleys can be accessed by just a few high mountain passes. Grasses for the horses and mules is plentiful, and the fishing is outstanding. To know where to camp and to provide food and shelter, that was my job. I came to Montana as a young boy from Ohio, fresh out of high school in 1955. Couldn't ride a horse or pack a mule, met the love of my life, and never left. A blind man taught me to listen. A teacher turned outfitter taught me to speak up, and his cousin showed me how to pack my first mule. I met many great horses, even better mules, and had the best crew anyone could wish for, all of them both curious and smart. As an outfitter, I brought thousands of people from all walks of life into the wilderness. Bankers from New York, pioneering grizzly bear researchers, dairy farmers from Wisconsin, gas station attendants, writers, and elders from the Salish tribe. Even more, I taught numerous students how to pack a horse or a mule in my old stone barn with the red doors in Missoula, Montana. Everybody looks for something different in life, seeks fulfillment and strives, but in the woods, we all long for solitude, the quiet in our otherwise busy lives. People find peace in their connection to nature. That is why I always collect my guests' watches before we leave the trailhead. Without watches, they can let go of the time in their worlds and fully live in the slower rhythm of the land. Together we travel, and they don't have to worry about where to find food or shelter. My crew and I take care of that. At night, after dinner around the campfire, I tell them the stories of the land that I had heard, and some that had happened to me. Stories bring us closer, connect us deeper to the world around us. My stories travel home with them, and my love for the Bob Marshall Wilderness becomes their love for the land.
Yeah, that's kind of
thank you.
the gist of the whole thing. You bet. You know, that's why we like to do it, and that's, you know, the stories you can tell. I've got 100 more stories that I haven't told yet. You know, that I've experienced.
Yeah.
And I'll just tell you a real short one if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You know, a good outfitter. He owned the Blacktail Ranch over on the other side of the Continental Divide. He and I are very good friends. Matter of fact, my daughter married his son, and we became real good friends. So we'd go in the hills a lot of times, just he and I, and we'd set up either his hunting camp or my hunting camp. We'd work a little bit, cut firewood or whatever we wanted to do. And then we'd always take our horses and go for a ride, just looking on the country over. Just sitting on the horse, on the back of the horse. You know, you're never any closer to God than when you're sitting on the back of a horse. So we ride and we talk to each other, but we also listen and look at the country. And we were doing that one day in the southern end of the Bob Marshall, and near a mountain called Bugle Mountain, which is bugle is when the elk bugle in rutting season. And we were right near that mountain, and we rode around and went to the western end of it. That's where it kind of slopes down a little bit. And geez, we rode up into Alpine Park, which is a beautiful flat park with nothing in it, just a trail that cuts across one end of it. And rode up to the end of it. We saw a blaze, and the blaze was not a Forest Service blaze. You know, a Forest Service blaze is an exclamation mark upside down. And that's registered in the Library of Congress, by the way. Nobody can use that blaze, but lots of people have their own blaze, two notches in the tree, or 3 or 5 or whatever, you know. Anyway, we come up and we saw these 3 notches in the tree, and they were grown over, you know, pretty well grown over. So we kind of looked them over, and Tag, my friend, he looked up the hill a ways, and he said, "There's another one up there." So we rode up to that and looked around, and then we saw another one, and pretty soon we were pretty well up onto Bugle Mountain, traveling through some rocky areas and then out into some meadows, and we got up there and we were still following the tracks, and finally we come to a flat spot that was, you could tell it was dug out of the earth, because it was a kind of a big pile, not a pile, but a level part of the ground that had been put there by man. And looking around, we saw a broken wheelbarrow, just all busted up, steel wheel, of course, no rubber tires, and we saw an old coffee pot and a skillet and a couple of tin cans laying there, and we thought, geez, this looks like a mine entrance. Looks like somebody was wheeling the dirt out of the mountain and dumping it here as a slide, where they were dumping their in what they were mining. Anyway, we looked around and got off our horses, even walked around there, and I looked over on the side of the hill, and there was a mock orange. That's a bush that grows out here real readily, and it's a bushy thing. And by the way, Lewis and Clark named it mock orange because it's false orange, because one of them was from Florida and knew what an orange tree looked like, and he named it right here in Missoula when they passed through the canyon here. But at any rate, here's a mock orange bush, all bushy and about 3.5, 4 feet high, and limbs going every which way. And I looked at that pretty close, and there's a hole back in there. So I went over and got my axe, and we cut this bush out of the way and pulled it out of there. And by golly, there's the entrance of a mine. It was about 3.5 feet high and about 6 feet wide. It caved in a lot. And so I said, well, let's I crawled in there as far as I could on my hands and knees, and got in there to where it got too dark to see anything. So I backed out and went over and got my flashlight off my horse, which we always carried, and started to use my flashlight. Well, it's one of those ones you turn on, you have to turn it on. So I left it turned off and put it in my mouth because I had to crawl on hands and knees. So I had to use all limbs to get in there. And I kept crawling in along quite a ways. I was in there probably 60 feet, I'd say, guess. And I thought, well, maybe I better see what I can't see anything, and I can't see where I came from now. So I turned the flashlight on. And as soon as I turned that flashlight on, I was laying in a carpet of daddy long legs, and they were hanging from the ceiling, crawling all over me.
Oh my gosh.
On daddy long leg, and they were crawling my neck. They were everywhere, all over me. And I looked down to my hands there, and they were crawling with daddy long leg spiders.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were hanging from the ceiling, 2 and 3 at a time, hanging down from the ceiling. Holy cow, boy. I tripped on my flashlight with my teeth and have you ever tried to run backwards?
No.
You can't do it. I
Yeah.
had a heck of a time. I couldn't turn around, too narrow, and I had to back out of there. And boy, as soon as I got out of there, I shook all the daddy long legs off my body and everything. And that mine, I've never gone back to it, but I know right where it is. So let me fool you that way.
Yeah.
But that's one of the really unique experiences. Here we found the mine that somebody had dug a long time ago, and then now it's been taken over by spiders as a wintering place, a place to go in there in the winter where it's halfway warm
Yeah.
from the earth. And that's kind of one of the experiences. But I've had lots and lots of experiences.
Yeah. Well, and then that story brings up a whole other question, because you want to know what was the story of the person that was there, and what
Who
was
was
there?
there?
Yeah,
That's
what's that
correct.
story?
Yeah, that's correct. As a matter of fact, I have one of the shells out of his rifle he had fired evidently, because it's just the empty shell, and it is a 30-40 Krag, so it's a real old gun, and very old gun. I have one just laying around here somewhere. But anyway, that's and
Cool.
we were able to do that all on the back of a horse.
Yeah.
And our horses are our buddies. I mean, they're just like my brother. They're here for my enjoyment, but I'm here for their enjoyment also. And I need to brush them and take care of them and treat them right. Always treat a horse right. We never, I bought mules. The man said that this mule kicks bad. Smoke, you don't want him. I can train him right away just by being real kind to him for a couple of weeks. And I quite often would tie just a little flake of hay in a bag to his tail, let him kick at it a few times. Pretty soon he realized that isn't doing any good. This guy still comes out and gives me something to eat and takes care of me. So taking care of a good horse is really a good feeling. And that's why I run a home for old retired horses.
Yeah, that's a noble calling for sure. Well, I feel like I could sit and listen to your stories all day, because they're just so fun, and yeah, they bring up so many questions. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that would be something that we should visit about, that maybe would be good to share with folks who might be watching?
And I want to leave everybody with one particular thing that's in my book too. And that is, I give all my horses and mules an IQ test.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
It's just like at school. I mean, they don't have to write anything down. They don't have to talk about anything, but it's how they act. And what I do is somebody wants to sell me a horse or a mule, and the first thing they'll do is crawl all over him and ride him around and put the saddle on. You want to ride him a little bit? And I don't want to ride him. Well, what do you want to do? I take the saddle off and just turn him loose in the corral. And I said, I want you to get out of sight, and I'll get over here behind the truck where I'm out of sight too. and we'll watch, and I want to see what that horse does. And then I usually lay my hat, and I've got a whole bunch of old busted down hats up behind me here, or my vest, and I've got one that's got teeth marks in it. But what happens is I lay something in the middle of the corral, turn the horse loose, go away and forget about him. Go out through the gate and disappear. And most horses, the first thing they'll do is walk around the outside. This is something new they haven't seen before. And they'll blow at it a few times, and they won't get near it. But the smart ones, they always show me curiosity. And when a horse shows me curiosity, I can teach him anything. I don't care how old he is, how young he is. Because if a horse shows curiosity, I can teach him. The same with my students that come here. They show curiosity in packing, I can teach them how to pack, without a doubt. When they leave here, they'll know how to pack. And when a horse comes to me, I know already that he's curious. So everything I do, curiosity is what leads me, and the horse. And that's kind of important. Some of these people buy horses that are, that it'll take them years to get them to where they can show curiosity. Mm-hmm. A lot of horses, most horses, will show you curiosity.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful, and that's a great little piece for us to take with us and remember to have good curiosity.
And old hats, because
you put you don't want to put your good hat in the middle.
You don't want to put your new stylish hat in there.
That's for sure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to visit today. I really enjoyed it, and I love the book. I just really enjoyed getting to spend some time with you through the stories, and I encourage everybody to pick up a copy.
Thank you.
All right.
I see your English saddle in the background. I have several in the other room. I have a whole line of saddles. I rode English some, and I also rode an Australian saddle.
Oh, yeah.
And they're nice saddles.
Looks like it too, yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys, and I'll send you a link to have a look, and we'll check back in. If you write another book, we'll check back in and talk about that one. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.